Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. And we answer your questions 7 days a week. So if you are watching the replay, you can always head over to askofficehours.global, where we will take your questions. Typically, we'll answer them in a day or two. Or if you are in the community, be sure to submit your questions now. We're doing Q&A for the next hour for today's show. And you know what, Alexander, let's get into the questions.
First question this morning is from Craig Kadoki in Toronto. With micro SD cards not being designed for use as boot volumes with the extra read-write cycle shortening the lifespan, would you look at the M.2 Pi Hat, and what impact would this have on Playout Bee or other Pi uses for you?
Alex?
The hat is, oops, let me get the right one here. This is what this is the Pi Hat Plus, at least, and this lets you connect NVMe drives and other things to the Raspberry Pi on top of it. For what you're talking about, I probably wouldn't bother. A micro SD that loses, it's so inexpensive that I would probably just get another one if it didn't. I've never had a micro SD card go bad, so I think you'd have to use it an awful lot to make it worth going through adding more hardware to it. Now, one of the advantages of putting this on is that it does mean you can add an NVMe drive, and if you're able to add that NVMe drive, you can put a lot more storage, obviously, into it. You can have 2 terabytes of storage, theoretically, if it can address all those things, and I'm not sure if a Raspberry Pi can.
Courtney?
Yeah, and I wouldn't worry about the read-write problems on the SD card shortening its life because of booting, because they have wear leveling routines built into them that move it around, move the writes around throughout the RAM every time you read and write to it. So it has routines built into it to prevent you from reading and writing the same area of the flash RAM multiple times. What I would do is just get one of these new, not these, well, they're not new now, GM K-Tech. I don't buy Raspberry Pis anymore. I just use these because they're so small. They have every port available. They use M.2 drives as their main drive. You can get up to a terabyte in there. This one has
and those
512.
are PCs, or are they?
This is a
Pis?
Windows 11 Pro, so it runs everything Windows 11 will run. It has a micro SD card slot, so you can load your media in and out. It has 2 HDMI, 1 gigabit Ethernet, 3 USB 3A ports. You can get them with USB-C ports for an additional display out. So, why get a Pi? Because after you buy that Pi Hat and the M2 card, you're going to end up spending more than the $208 that GMK Tech was. So, and it's a lot more capable, and it runs Playout Bee as well.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas asks, if I have a few hundred photos to transfer from my iPhone to Google Photos and set my phone down a few inches from my UBIQUITI UNIFI 6 Pro, they seemingly transfer much faster. Is there a better way, like an Ethernet adapter?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, since I do Comic-Con every year and I have lots of photos when I come back, I'm always concerned with this question. And for me, nothing still beats a copper connection if you can do it. I know that Bluetooth and Wi-Fi are both getting significantly faster over the course of time, but somehow it still feels to me like a copper wire between the source and the target destination is the quickest way to move things, particularly now that USB-C or the newest cable connection on the iPhone 15s, and I would assume on the equivalent products on Samsung, is so much faster in terms of bandwidth than our old Lightning connectors. But I'm actually still using a Lightning connector and pretty happy with it. So I just try to get off anything wireless or transcoding to Bluetooth in the middle and just get on a copper wire, and you might get the fastest results out of that.
Courtney?
Yeah, plug in a USB to get it to another computer. But if you're going to get up to the net, which is where you're probably trying to go to upload it to Google Photos. I just got, as long as you're using Wi-Fi 6, I just got my new laptop, which is over there. I had it plugged in to Ethernet, and I got just upgraded to fiber, so I now have symmetrical down and up. And I had to reposition some stuff, so I unplugged the Ethernet connection. And Wi-Fi 6, because it's in the same room with my Netgear Wi-Fi 6 at 5 gigahertz, gets 780 up I mean, yeah, 780 up and 810 down off of Wi-Fi 6. So I just left the Ethernet cable unplugged rather than run new cable, because that's certainly fast enough. Because Google Photos will not be able to take it at that rate, and your wife and your phone won't be able to deliver it probably at that rate. So you'd be surprised. Test the bandwidth on Wi-Fi 6 first.
Alexander?
Couple of things. So if you have an iPhone 15, the new USB-C connection can do 10 gigabits per second. So there's not going to be any way faster than that. So connect it to your Mac directly. Now, if your Mac is also hardwired to the internet, even better, because once you pull the photos off the phone, you'll be able to get it up to where it needs to go in the cloud much faster than anything you can do on Wi-Fi.
Next question.
Blake Cooper in Chicago, USA, and this is from the QR code. Is there a way to utilize the LiveU Solo for a Zoom connection? What would the panel recommend for generic internet on indoor corporate shoots? Mofi, Peplink, Teradek?
Alex?
It depends on what you're trying to do. So if you are, if you're trying to bring Zoom connections in, and then it depends on whether that Zoom connection is mission critical, is that your corporate partner that wants to see what you're doing, or are they going to be on a show? If they're just trying to see what they're doing, I'd probably lean towards a Peplink. So a Peplink product is going to let you bond multiple connections together. The real challenge that you have is that, number one, is in the United States, getting SIM cards and having them at a reasonable price and actually have them work is difficult. And it's important that the SIM cards aren't they aren't from the same provider. So you can't get like 4, Verizon SIM cards. You need one from Verizon, one from T-Mobile. And the reason for that, by the way, is not just that it's one service and it could go down. It's because the SIM cards will know where they're coming from and it'll clamp them all down. So we found this. Ask me how I know. So anyway, so you have to mix and match those to make those work. The advantage that you get with LiveU is LiveU manages all those relationships, with those companies, and you don't end up getting, bottlenecked artificially. So those are the things you want to kind of think about there. The Peplink is probably the best general purpose. But what I will say is, if you plan to actually have that person on a broadcast or put them in front of people, you really need a wired internet connection. It's not going to work to do this, because what happens is as you start to bond these, you're multiplying their jitters or adding their jitters together. And what's happening is that you end up losing frames and having breakup in weird ways because of the way it's reframing those coming in. It's not going to give you a clean signal. And I think that and people tell me that, I do this all the time. I've never seen a clean signal from a bonded cellular connection. Ever. Like, it's not, and it's never, it's been okay, but it's not something that I would put in front of people. But if it's a client just watching, it's fine. But if it's mission critical, you need to figure it out. And unfortunately, that means, I'm assuming, you're trying to avoid paying the hotel or paying the venue for the incredibly expensive internet, but you may have to do that if it matters.
Bill?
What scares me is the word indoor corporate shoots, because there's so many different kinds of indoor. And I'm going back. I would listen to Alex about everything he just said, because our experience doing things like covering NAB and some of the other shows that we've done says that anything wireless where you're trying to get video out of a convention floor runs into all sorts of issues. I'll never forget being on the show floor at NAB and literally a 2-foot move to the right or left from where we had a signal, and the signal would just completely fall apart. Now, we had things like LED walls and things like that were not good for the wireless signal back, but this is just something I would be careful about and test. And as Alex says, if this is mission critical, throw all the time and effort and prep as into it as you can, because it's not a simple thing to get wireless off a convention show floor out to the world cleanly.
And just pulling in a comment from our community, Henry mentions that Peplink now has a pay-as-you-go cell plan, just as support in that. Next question.
Next question is from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. I struggled this morning with my iPhone as a webcam. It may be finally time to move on. If the panel can share some possible suggestions and links, that would be appreciated.
Tony, I want to just give you a moment. You want to describe a little bit more about what took place and what you're looking for?
So I always put my iPhone in the back of the teleprompter. And so it's always a manual adjustment every day. And because I'm using the Shoot app, I have to reset it and then pair it, the controls to another iPhone. And so this morning I started at 20 minutes before 9 to try to get on camera to be on the panel today. And I just could not get it to line up properly. And so I struggled and struggled. And so I finally got it about 9:15. And because I'm still adjusting to my setup being moved around, I always try to get in early. And so I didn't know if I was going to be able to appear on the panel or not, because normally I need a little bit more time to get on screen. So it was a little frustrating this morning.
Well, we're happy you're here. Alexander?
Yeah, there's different ways you can go here. It really depends on what your budget is, but I would definitely get some kind of standalone camera that you don't have to set up every single day. Just have something that's a dedicated. It's nice to be able to just sit down and have everything running and ready to go. So like for me, for example, like for well under $1,000, I just went the super budget route and I bought a used Panasonic Lumix GH5, which is an older discontinued micro four thirds format camera. The lenses are super cheap for those. Autofocus isn't fantastic. I actually happen to have a manual lens, so I've adjusted it. But that camera, I think I paid $400 for it, and I put a $200 manual lens on it. So it didn't cost me very much, and this is my frame and how it looks. Beyond that, I mean, if I were to do it again, this would be a much higher budget, but I would probably look at a camera that has a much larger sensor, like a Sony FX30, has a fan in it, so you don't have to worry about the camera overheating. Some Sony cameras have a track record for overheating, so it kind of concerns me as some of those ones that do not have a fan in it. So I would look at maybe an FX30. I think the price has recently come down a little bit. Of course, the glass is going to be the most expensive part, getting a good lens for a camera like that, and I'll let Alex pick up on that.
Alex?
Yeah, yeah. Tony, do you know what kind of price range you want? What you want to spend on a camera?
Um,
Or what you're willing to spend? Not what you want to spend, which is nothing, obviously, but what are you willing to spend on a camera?
I think I could go as far as maybe $600.
Yeah, so I think that there's a wide variety of the Sony 64, like I think it's the 6400 or others that are there. What you're looking for in that price range at 300 or below, you're looking at a webcam, and I would say you're probably looking at a Insta360 link. Between $300 and $600, what you're looking for is an APS or Super 35 camera that has an HDMI output. If it has a micro HDMI output, just make sure that you know that you're going to need to get with it. Just assume that you're going to get a little cage for it, and you're going to get a little connector that takes the pressure off of that HDMI. So I have for a little bit more money, and then the new the ZV-E10, the first generation is what my wife uses for her setup. And she gets a lot of compliments about her setup. And she uses the ZV-E10. Now, I will say that if it gets hot enough, it will still, even with the fake battery, will still turn off. But that was an unusual day. Like she's only had it happen once. But that one may have gone down in price because of because the new one came out. So the new one came out, it might have pushed that one down. So you might want to take a look for that one. It's turned out to be a really solid camera for us in general to use there. I got it for me. It doesn't have LUT control, so I decided, and she had a webcam before that. So I just moved it over. But so I think that the ZV-E10 is also a really nice one to use there. But again, what you want to do is you're going to want to get there's a little cage for it. And then there's a thing that will basically go on the cage, and it'll set your HDMI, a full-sized HDMI, in a right angle, like on the cage. And then a little cable will come out, and it doesn't put any pressure on that micro HDMI. The problem with micro HDMI is that they have a tendency, if you pull at them, to break, and it breaks the connection, and then the camera's not nearly as useful. So you want to kind of make sure you take the pressure off of any of these small cameras. Assume that you're going to need to take the pressure off of wherever it's going in, whether it's micro, mini, HDMI, even full size. My full size HDMI out of my FX30 here has the same thing. It's got a big cable that goes in, and it's got pressure. It's got a connection release. So think about that there. Just assume that there's another $100 there that's waiting that you're going to spend on that. But if you're going up to about $600, again, the little Sony, and I can never remember the smaller Sony numbers, but they're like the 6400 or the 5800 or 5400 or 5100. But those ones in there are going to produce a great image quality there as well, especially at 1080p. So I would definitely think through those. It'll look really nice, and it'll be nice for you to not have to use your phone because having to set your phone up, you really want your system as best you can to just not, like my system doesn't change, or it doesn't change very much. Or MicroSD comes over for gray matter. I move things around a little bit, but in general, the core of my system is the same all the time, and that really takes so much stress out of jumping on calls.
Jesse?
Tony, I have a quick question. Is it a USB only connection that you're looking for, or are you open to HDMI? Like, are you using an ATEM or something as an intermediary before you go out to the web?
The iPhone goes into the ATEM, and so I'm using an adapter.
Yeah, and you would not need to do that. I mean, you'll definitely get a camera with HDMI. So that would work well, unless you're getting. This is the one challenge with the webcams, like a Insta360 Link is not going to go through your ATEM. That doesn't have an HDMI output. There are some that do, but that one doesn't.
So I was actually coming to a comment, Alex, where someone had said in our community, David had mentioned getting an Insta360 Link. Can you repeat what you just said about why you would not?
It doesn't have HDMI out. So if you want to just use it, Ozbot makes an HDMI converter, but then you lose control of the Insta360 Link. You can't go through that converter and control the camera, and that's a bummer. So
right.
A lot of us would love to see them, and I think that Logitech came out with one I think that does both of them, but it's a bit more expensive. I think they have a $995 one and they kind of almost got there, but not quite. Like the chip isn't quite big enough. I think they have HDMI and USB-C out now, and they just didn't quite get over the hump of making it worth it.
And Ant.
Yeah, I'm going to echo pretty much what everyone else said, but if you're looking at budget-wise, the Canon R100, I believe it's now marked down under $500. It will give you 1080p on the web stream using HDMI, but it's micro, as you mentioned, and it's super tiny. And yeah, be careful with that. Get a case to try to secure it, but it's a pretty nice camera for the budget. And then the Sony EV10, this is the Mark II, Mr. Alice. They just sent that for me to try out and play with, and I agree with you wholeheartedly on the original one. It was very, very nice, but again, you're going to pay a little bit more for that one.
Next question.
John Folson, Sealingsgrove, Pennsylvania is asking, does anyone use a Mac application called Hazel? What are your thoughts on it?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I used to use Hazel, and it was excellent for what I used it for. It's an application that lets you create automatic rules on file structures. You can tag things, you can run Apple scripts, you can move files around. What I realized was I spent more time administering Hazel to solve problems that never came up in my life. And so I just use my email inbox and search through my email now to find those files in folders.
Alexander?
Yeah, I too, for years, I used to use Hazel. I mean, it's still a very powerful application, but I find that the main reason why I stopped using it is because as I slowly started moving stuff to the cloud, like I used to manage all my photos locally. And so when you've got thousands and thousands of files that you always have to manage and tag properly and do batch renaming. Think of Hazel, for those that haven't used it, think of it as scripted, automated scripting, but without the command line stuff. So it's got a nice user interface. It's very easy to use. So you can tell it to watch a folder, and when you drop files into it, it'll, you give it the things that you want it to do, like automatically tag these, or this is the naming convention that I want to use. So it is very useful for that, and I think it serves a purpose if you're working a lot with files on your computer. But if you've moved stuff to things like iCloud Photos and iCloud Drive, and you're not managing a whole lot of photos, then it starts to become, not very useful.
Next question.
Next question is from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. I took a photo of a diver at Barton Springs in slow motion on an iPhone 15 Pro Max, but it came out grainy. I'll try the same shot again today on a Samsung S24 Ultra. But how could I make slow motion sharper on both phones? And there's a link there.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, you could add a little light. You'll probably have the same results on the S24. I looked and I did find there's a thread on Reddit about why is the iPhone 15 Pro Max slow motion video quality bad compared to the 14 Pro. And apparently, as the resolution goes up on the sensor, you got to remember the sensor sites, the individual photodiodes that capture the light, capture the photons, get smaller. And of course, smaller the area means less photons can hit it, which means you need more light or more time to accumulate those photons before you read it out. And the higher frame rate you go, the shorter the time between the readouts, so there's less chance for the photons to accumulate on those sites. The way some cameras handle slow-mo is have high-resolution sensors is they'll capture from 4 different adjacent pixels and sum those values together to which will reduce your resolution by half. That's why it will get pixelated. Or it will get grainy if they just sample a single pixel or maybe every other pixel and amplify it because they turn the gain up and in the post-processing they bring the gain up, and that brings the noise up because that you'll see variance between the frames. So if you slow the frame rate down to 120, and in that thread they mentioned that if they slowed their frame rate down from 240 to 120, that they got sharper images. So try that. That might improve it as well.
Bill?
Yeah, whenever I hear the word grainy, I always think in terms of gain or the lack of light, meaning that there's some sort of amplification of each pixel site readout such that it's adding extra grain or extra boost to the signal that shouldn't be there necessarily. So Courtney was right. Those are the first things I'd look at. Outside of that, it should be pretty good. Another thing that I've noticed is that, and now this happens with iPhones, I'm not sure the Samsung works the same way, but in the iPhone system, sometimes it'll do a quick readout of the picture in low res and then replace that file as you're downloading or reviewing pictures. I can't tell you the number of times that I have brought a photo up on my computer screen. It's been fuzzy looking. I come back to it a little bit later and it's crisp. And what happened was that the main file was replacing a temporary shot, and the temporary shot was low res, and the higher res just needed to fill in all the rest of the additional data before it looked great. So pay attention to those kind of things, but there's no reason you shouldn't be able to get good quality unless you've got a really slow shutter or you're doing something else that's doing what Courtney was talking about, which is averaging a lot of pixels over a single one. These phone sensors on both sides are really amazing now, and you should be able to get clean shots if you've got enough light and a fast enough shutter speed to freeze the motion.
Alexander?
Use a real camera for this. That's what I would do.
As the panel goes wild. And Ants, go ahead.
I'm sitting there thinking I'm going to be the contrarian here because, yeah, these smartphone sensors are much better nowadays, but even on a real camera shooting slow-mo, you better have some light. If you have a full-frame sensor going down to 120 or 240, you still better have some light because it's just not going to work. So thank you, Mr. Alexander.
Next question.
Leo Mendel in Mont Blanc, France is asking, there has been huge price drops on the Behringer X32 prices over the weekend. New model?
Alex?
Look at this. I mean, this is... when he says huge, he means huge. 880 drop on this one. The rack, I believe. Let me see. Get my mouse over here. The rack is being dropped by $800, so it's $899 for the rack. Even if you go down to like the $280 drop on the XR18. So these are they're not minor. This is clearing inventory. Absolutely. So you would assume that this definitely means that we're going to see something new probably right after Labor Day. So that'd be my guess, is that right after Labor Day, you're going to see a whole new, and it looks like when you look at what they're dropping, it looks like it's kind of across the board. So I didn't, on the X32s, I don't know if they or they're going out of business. So I don't think that's the case. But the one thing I didn't look for is a Behringer wing, just to see if that has dropped. Behringer wings also have dropped. So if you look at the let's see, if we look at this here, you'll see $900 drop for the Behringer wing. Maybe not as aggressive as some of the other ones, but still aggressive. So it does sound like there's probably some kind of infrastructural change that Behringer's about to roll out, and they're going to try to spend the month getting rid of this stuff. I know that different people have different opinions about the Behringer X32. As a utility mixer, $899 is a pretty good deal. For it, it's not as good as I'm not going to say it's as good as like the DM3 from the Yamaha or many other sources, but I've used them for a long time, and they've worked out relatively well. So it's something to consider at that price. The XR18 as a small mixer is at under $500 now, $459 or whatever, is a pretty great deal too. So it's a really so they're good as they are. I'm just going to wait. I've got my X32s, so I'm just going to wait to see what comes out next. But it's not a bad deal.
Alexander?
Yeah, so 100% I agree with Alex there. When you see that kind of pricing, that slashing, it usually means there's a new product in the queue. Now, just keep in mind that the Behringer X32 platform, and I'll lump the Midas series of consoles there too, they are quite old now. So I believe they were released in 2012. So that's 12 years. So that's a long time for a product to be in the market. And I'm sure they've got something new coming out. Now, the Wing is a bit of a different product. The Wing is a much newer product. That price reduction just could be because they're not selling as well. It's a bit of a weird product. I mean, very cool product. I love the design of it. But as far as analog inputs, you get very little analog inputs because they kind of expect you to use a digital stage box with that thing. So it's really a big control surface where you build out a system and expand it with stage boxes. So perhaps that product hasn't sold as well. But yeah, the major price drops like that, there's got to be something new.
And Alex.
And Tim McCulloch in the chat says Behringer has been showing previews of 2 new versions of the Wing. So they may be looking at expanding the Wing line so that maybe it could be one of those things where the X32 goes away and there's an updated Wing, or the Wing line goes all the way down. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but it definitely looks like something big is happening.
Next question.
From the QR code, Graham Warden in Dallas, Texas asks, I'm looking for transitions. I'm new to editing video, and I'm curious as to the best bang for buck when it comes to stock and template video transitions on the market today.
Jesse.
I would go easy on the bang for buck transition packages. It's kind of the signature of somebody who's just getting into editing. We're going to jump over to Resolve and take a look at as far as we go. Of course, we use cross dissolve. That one works fine. We do occasionally a blur dissolve, but that's rare. Dip to color dissolves work fine for us. And there is one in here that when we're going off the beaten path, we use brightness flash, which is like a dip to white, but it kind of does an overlay effect as well. So it gives you a bit of a flash. And we really only use that for event compilation videos, but for everything else, cuts, crossfades, but 90% cuts will get you across the finish line. It's like the LUT packs. Like a lot of people when they're starting out, they just slap on a whole bunch of weird LUTs because it looks cinematic. And, people grow out of that phase pretty quickly.
Ant?
I think it depends on the video that you're creating, because there are some instances where people want those weird jump cut, whippy pan types of transitions. And yeah, you can get a lot of that stuff for fairly cheap online via something like Envato or what have you. But I highly recommend just jumping on the YouTube University, the free YouTube University, open up your editor and play around with the different options inside of whatever editor you're using, be it Resolve or Motion or a Final Cut or Premiere. There's a lot of free things out there to walk you through some transitions that you can create your own personal presets right there.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I'm with Jesse. Friends don't let friends use animated transitions. Those were over in the 80s. So I'm talking about the animated wipes, or there are some real fancy ones now, like they were saying with, whip pans and things like that. But you can do those in camera these days pretty easily. End your take with a kick the image sideways and then cut it together in the middle of the whip pan, and you got your transition.
And Bill?
I'm splitting the difference between, I agree with Ant and I agree with Courtney and Jesse in terms of this. I use transitions for a reason. And if I can't articulate a reason for somebody as to why I'm using it, then I try not to. In that respect, I agree with Jesse. Fewer is better in terms of the fancy stuff. Now, I have done things like in a corporate training video, if my main image of a talking head or something like that is here, I will push right to get to a particular type of content, let's say an actuality from the field. Then I'll come back to my speaker, and then I'll push to the other side to do something like a roll-in graphic or something like that. The reason I'm doing that is I'm trying to build an expectation of my audience is that when I do this move, it means this. And when I come back, it means you're centered back on the person. And if I go all the way over to the right, I'm going from one thing to another. That adds meaning to the transitions rather than just eye candy. But as Ant mentioned, there are some kinds of videos where eye candy really does help liven up stale content. So you just have to use them with common sense. I will also say I'm very pleased that motion, in the case I'm in the Final Cut kind of world, allows you to create your own of these. And typically a lot of the packages that you're talking about that are sold are just built in something like Motion. So you may want to dig a little deeper and just learn one of those things. Motion on the Apple side. If you're on the PC side, maybe you're an After Effects user. You can often create your own motion templates or motion transitions, and they'll be just as good or better because they're exactly what you want.
And to add on to all this great information that you've already received, I would say a couple that we've used in the past being Envato Elements. They have a pretty good library for some transitions. Also Pond 5, if I remember, haven't been using them as much lately, but those two and there's one other Creative Market. I'm trying to see if it could quickly pop up. But yeah, those two, Envato Elements being a key one. And then to kind of give just a little bit more language, what you're hearing from the panel is the story that you're trying to tell. And so what transition will help you best tell that story? So if it is some fast motion and those wipes, and you kind of see that in sports, you see that in car racing, etc. If that's the kind of content, then yes, hopefully some of those will help. Otherwise, as Jesse alluded to earlier, is just some light cuts, some transitions. What's the clip? What's the B-roll that you're using that will help you? Next question.
From the QR code, Gabriela Echesho Mistiera and Suse Marie's asking, at the Carnival, how do you amplify the music from Matterhorn or zippers so it can be heard almost everywhere, but doesn't overwhelm the sounds elsewhere or the carousel? Thanks.
Alex?
I think this one came in today, so I'm not sure. Our expert isn't here. So I would say generally, I'm going to give a more general answer than Carnival. It's the distribution of speakers. So distribution and direction of speakers is how you manage most of that sound and getting them to where they need to be so that you're not trying to go very far with each set. Although in the conversation we had last week, which was amazing, it doesn't sound like they worry too much about it. They just spread the trucks out and run them pretty loud. It sounds like you might not be able to hear anything for a little while afterwards. And you won't notice because you're at the bar that's moving down with the thing. So if you didn't see, if anyone watching didn't see last Wednesday, second hour, about how they do audio for Carnival in Trinidad, definitely worth checking out.
Alexander?
Just one quick thing on speakers design too. I don't know what speakers they use on those rigs, but speaker choice is really critical. And one of the things that you'll always find too when you look at the specs of a speaker is you have to look at the horizontal and vertical dispersion. So if you don't want as much spill, you can get speakers with a much more narrow, focused horizontal dispersion. And so that would be key if you don't want it to, like, there are speakers you can get with 110, 115 degree horizontal. So, you know, if you got something really close by and you don't want them to hear it as much, you need something with a lot more focus. So the design of the speaker is really critical there.
Next question.
Jesse Kester from Glendale is asking, we took some incredible UV photographs on our Canon 5D Mark III, but when we switched over to the Pocket 6K, the images were dead. What gives?
Jesse, go ahead and give us some more context.
So we cracked open the 60 and took a look inside, and when we got it, or the 6K, sorry, we cracked over the 6K, there's a plate of glass in front of the sensor plate, and I just long assumed that was to protect the sensor plate from dust, and that if you had to clean it, you would clean the glass instead of cleaning the sensor, and then you could replace it. That's a UV filter. That is specifically designed to kill all the UV light, and I'm wondering if anyone on the panel has any experience with any solution to that. Do you just take your pocket camera apart and remove that piece of glass, replace it with a non-UV canceling glass? Are there lenses, filters that would help counteract that effect? What's the good word?
Let's see, Bill.
Yeah, in almost all video cameras at that class, there will be a UV filter in there. UV tends to spread out and kind of infect regular video shots. So in this case, a dedicated still camera that does not have that expects the users to only put filters on the lens should they choose to, is just going to be in the different class. Most video cameras have UV filters, and they're undefeatable. So yes, you will have to get your micro tools out and go in and remove the filter should you want to do that. And if you do that, don't be surprised if your video shots end up a little softer and blurrier being infected by the UV light. It's just how things work, as I understand it.
Alex.
Yeah, you need to get to full spectrum. You'll need to take that filter off. I wouldn't do it myself. You can. I would send that out. There's companies that do those conversions of those cameras for a couple $100, and I'm generally unwilling to dig into my cameras. So I usually want somebody else to do that who's done it more than once, which will be the number of times I've done it. So I'd rather send it to someone who's done it 20, 30, 40, 100 times, whatever. They tend to be better at it and tend to leave less scratches and all those things.
And Courtney.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I always thought that those filters were infrared filters, not the other side of the spectrum, instead of UV, because the sensors themselves are more sensitive to infrared light than they are.
I believe they do both.
Light.
I believe that filter filters both ends. It basically cuts the. I'm not
the middle out,
and I'm not
spectrum.
100% sure, but my understanding is that filter or the set of filters that is there is basically. It's shoehorning the visible light into that process, so that when you take that off, you should be able to do both infrared and ultraviolet.
Yeah, because I've seen cinematographers, if they're going to shoot, if they want to master in black and white, they will have those filters. They'll remove that filter so they get full spectrum and use that as a black and white image.
Mm-hmm.
Next question.
From the QR code, Jason in Hattiesburg is asking, have you talked about this portable USB-C hub for the iPhone 15 on the show? If not, what are your thoughts on it? Also, do you know of any similar devices?
Alexander.
No, but oh my, does it look good. Look at this thing. This looks like a beautifully machined piece of aluminum. It's got a cold shoe mount on it. It's got a bunch of ports on it, including apparently a full-size HDMI for video out. You got quarter 20 mounts on the side, $89. It looks like USD, and you can pre-order it. Condor Blue makes really good stuff, and this looks like a really solid piece of equipment.
Alex?
That is exactly what I've been looking for. I mean, I have this weird little clamp that I used even just last night when we were doing the 3D version of TWiT. And I have this weird little clamp, and I finally found one USB hub that had all the USBs going one direction, so I could clamp it in, and yeah, this is way better. So I think I'll probably get one.
Go ahead, Bill.
I can't remember his name, but I talked to the owner of Condor Blue at our NAB coverage. So if you want to go back and look at some of their products, they're a fine company. They make really good things, and they're very thoughtful in their engineering. So it's one of the brands that I've come to trust after seeing the breadth of their product line at NAB and being able to talk to them. I think they do a really good job, and I'd give it a shot.
And Jason, I don't know if you're in the comments, but we've got some people who have already pre-ordered. So thank you for bringing that to the Office Hours global community. Next question.
From the QR code, Gabriela Esteso Mestiera and Sue St. Marie is asking, with the popularity of Sony cameras, would Blackmagic Design do even better if they allowed remote control of Sony or other cameras in addition to their own cameras?
Jesse?
It depends on what you mean by even better. So they might sell a few more units to people who are in the Sony ecosystem already, but when you're in a front-to-back Blackmagic pipeline, you might start to see that their version of even better is creating a workflow that begins, at the camera sensor and ends at distribution. So if their version of even better is a unified pipeline, then it's unlikely that they'll pour huge resources into custom tailoring their tools to work with cameras outside of their pipeline. Not saying it's impossible, just saying that, they might be focused on other things for the next couple of years.
And John?
Yeah, Jesse's right. Blackmagic is a vertically integrated company. Its value proposition is that they can do more things by selling you the entire chain, as Jesse was saying. They would lose money on all the cameras they don't sell as a result, also, if they were to try to incorporate those features with other cameras.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's just a resource issue. Like they're like, why bother? We make cameras. Like I don't think it's a giant specific thing. Like we're not gonna give you control of the cameras because they're trying to protect something. I think it really is just like they have a lot of fish to fry, and this is not one of them that's important to them because they already make all their own cameras, and so there's not any reason to do that. They're not. I don't think they're going to see any upside to it. But companies like Scarhoy and others build intermediate devices that would allow potentially allow you to do a lot of those things. It wouldn't be the problem really for Blackmagic is that the way that they do shading on their cameras is different than the way that Sony does shading on their cameras. So I think that the problem is that it's not just can I have control? They have to learn everything about how a Sony works to give you the proper control for that. And that would be a big undertaking. And I think that they just wouldn't bother.
And Bill.
And the most minor, I would think, issue is they want to do it, they can do it, but there's also intellectual property at stake here. So if Sony has a control protocol that they own, they've developed, and Blackmagic wants to get in and mess with it, they just have to have some sort of agreement between those companies that allows them to go in there without
Sony does that. I mean, Sony makes that available. That protocol is pretty widely available. Like I don't think that that's probably an issue there, but I think it really is just an energy issue.
Next question.
From the QR code, Zach Jeffers from the Great Pacific Northwest. The more I use Stream Decks, up to 6 XLs now, the more I'm looking for ways to combine different versions and sizes. Has anybody had time with the new Cooler Master kits?
Alexander.
I've not used them, but this is what they look like, and it looks like a pretty neat product. I mean, it's kind of what I hope the Stream Deck products would work out to be, a more modular system where you can add on things like if you want fader controls or dials, pots, that kind of stuff. So it looks pretty cool. Haven't used it, so I can't speak to the quality of it, but it strikes me that if you've got 6 of the largest Stream Decks already, you might want to start looking at a more serious product like the X-Key products, because you can get them in a variety of larger surfaces with joysticks even, and they're more modular, and the key feel is much better on these. They're going to be a little bit more money, but I would probably prefer to have some X-Key products instead of having 6 or more Stream Decks.
And just following up on what Alexander says, Jeff in the comments says, spend the money on better controllers. TYST or TIST, is that the way it said, with central control or Scarhoy would be helpful. Next question.
Francis Fry in Cambridge, Massachusetts asks, my teenage son wants to begin filming things in slow motion. What do you recommend for a beginner camera?
Ant?
This is when I say use the smartphone, your iPhone or what have you. You're a teenager, they're just getting started. You're not fully invested in some other huge camera system. You already have the phone. It already shoots slow-mo. This will allow them to understand what it takes to get the framing right, to understand the lighting around them and stability, and it's not costing you any extra money. That's where I'd start.
Alex?
Yeah, where I'd start is probably, I agree with Ant, that what I'd started with is a phone. The most flexible camera that I've used when it comes to frame rate, if you're getting outside of the phone, is probably the Blackmagic 12K, which is slowly dropped in price. It's about $6,300. You might be able to find it even used for less. So it had some, it doesn't shade from the switchers. And so as a result, it didn't have the same value that some of the other cameras did, but I've got 3 of them. And one of the things that, I know has 3 of them. I don't have 3 of them. So, but we have 3 of them. And what they've been really useful for is it's a very wide range of frame rates and resolutions. And so when I'm doing testing and I need to dial something in, I'm able to do almost anything I want. So I get up to, at 4K Super 16, I can get up to 240 frames a second. But it's going to be a different look. But I can also shift to 8K, 120 frames a second. And so and I can even go to 12K. I very rarely use 12K because the problem that you really have is the bandwidth out of the camera. This is one of the limitations of that camera, is that you can only get a gig out of the camera, and you'll do a gig a second. If you're doing 8K 120, you'll end up at like 12-to-1 compression just because that's all you can get out of it. So it is, but it's a very flexible camera when you're trying to do tests and you want to play. It's like a little lab camera. It works out really well, and it's a reasonably good camera too. But that's the one that if you're looking for a camera. There used to be one. Sony used to make ones that went to really high frame rates. I had a Sony the 900, and I can't think of what the front end of that was. F900 would go up to 960 frames a second, but it was like this really small little weird window. So you may be able to find some other ones that do some slow motion, but usually what you give up is you give up resolution. Now, of course, if your son's really gets serious about it, then the next thing you'll start talking about is renting a Phantom for a day, or renting, something like that for a day, where you start getting into 10,000, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, even 100,000 frames a second.
And Jesse?
For the first adventures out, I would really, really recommend a phone, but a high-end phone. And the reason that a phone would be the starting point is not just because of the camera, but because of the infrastructure built into it. So if you're shooting on an action cam, you got to take that footage, offload it, transcode it, edit it, export it, and then get it back onto your phone before you can put it on Instagram or TikTok to share with your friends. What you want is an ecosystem with minimum friction, and you're going to get that on a phone where you won't get it somewhere else. That said, I would recommend the best phone that you can trust your teenage son with, because something like the Pro Max has 3 different styles of lenses, and that's where creativity really comes to life, is if you can zoom in, if you can go wide, if you can go medium. So if you get an action cam, you're stuck with that wide angle fisheye lens, or you can crop in. But you want to have them. You want to give them the option to swap out lenses and to experiment with different kinds of shots in a controlled ecosystem where they can immediately review the footage and immediately upload it and share it and get some positive feedback.
And Francis, just reinforcing some comments coming in from the community, Vic mentions that basic camera and photography skills are priceless, similar to what Ant said about learning lighting and everything like that to support your son's slow motion ambitions. Next question.
From the QR code, Gabriela Cheso Mistiara and Suse Marie is asking, what hardware would you recommend for experimenting with self-hosted large language models or other AI technology on a personal level at school or home?
John?
Yeah, any modern computer can run things for experiments. Mainly, you're going to be focused on RAM, and if it's going to be like your day-to-day usage of the models. If you're actually running the models, you need a GPU that's going to be powerful. I would seriously consider seeing the cost of just trying to learn how to build it in AWS, which is strictly usage-based, because by the time you start building out PCs or Macs that can really run these models well, it's a lot of compute that you're talking about that you could run hosted elsewhere with a more powerful machine.
Courtney?
I would recommend a Windows machine with an NVIDIA RTX board in it. And NVIDIA has their own application called NVIDIA Chat RTX. It's designed to run on the RTX, like the 3070s, the 3040s, the 4050s, the 4070s. Those boards that have enough video RAM, local video RAM, and speed to use the GPU to process that local TNG, the type of or RAG, RAG type of LLM. So it will use your contextual data from your local, any documents that you feed in to form your own data to mix with the other data. So look at that. Look at NVIDIA's Chat RTX, and you may already have laptops that have those boards in them or desktops that have those boards in them run under Windows.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, other than transition libraries, what AV tools or gear that we may have invested in heavily in the past 10 years is now obsolete? Is there any tech still being marketed that you would advise everyone to avoid?
Jesse?
I came down a little hard on transition libraries, but I don't consider that an inessential part of the learning process. So those transition packs, those LUT packs, it's part of, jumping into the world of editing and finding out who you are as an editor. They are essential to the growth process. Gear that was not essential, and I apologize to anyone who ever had to use one of these because you might be triggered. This was the worst piece of gear that I've ever come in physical contact with, and I'm happy to see it excised from our pipeline.
Bill?
I actually looked around and I thought about this for a moment because I realized that I haven't plugged in a BNC connector to get baseband video out of anything in the last maybe 3 or 4 years. Yes, if you're up at the top end and you're working with SDI or something like that, they still use the connector. But for a simple video connection, I just haven't touched one of those in a long time. So I would look at my library of gear, and anything that's primary connection is baseband on BNC, I would probably look to get rid of it. That's sad, but there you are.
And Courtney?
Yeah, those old capture boards like the Canopus, remember those that used Firewire 400? Try and find a Firewire 400 connection these days on a computer. It's really, really hard. So you can dump those, plus anything that had built-in TV tuners from the analog days. Those are completely worthless these days because they're not even transmitting on analog channels anymore. So you can throw all of those away.
Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia is asking, what is the best way to clean the glass on my iKan teleprompter?
Alexander?
I would avoid solvents. There are special cleaning solutions for glass, for cameras that you can get at your local photography store. Just to show a couple things here for just quickly blowing off dust off of lenses. I use one of these that looks like a blimp. It says patented. I don't know what exactly or how they managed to get a patent on this. But this is good for blowing dust off of stuff. And then you're going to want to get a really, really soft microfiber cloth. Oftentimes I find I don't even need solution because for me, the cameras are in a controlled environment. They never go outside. So oftentimes just a soft microfiber cloth with no solution will do it. I have this Zeiss branded one that I got from my local photography shop. This is one of the softest microfiber cloths I've ever used, and it doesn't have those rough edges either. So you have to be careful with that because some microfiber cloths have an edge to it with stitching, and that can also scratch lenses. So do be careful. I would probably pop into whatever your local camera shop is in your city and see what they have for that kind of thing.
And Courtney?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to clean. As if it's just dust, as Jesse was saying, as Alexander was saying, is blow it off or use a brush. But fingerprints are another story because they have oil in them. And once oil gets on that surface, it can attack it. And so you want to clean those off if you can. The best solution to clean that off with, I've found, is a mixture of 50% isopropyl alcohol and 50% distilled water. That was what the manufacturer of all of our prompter glass recommended, and what they packaged and sold with the glass to clean oil fingerprints off the glass. And use, like we were saying, a super soft microfiber cloth so that you're not going to grind anything into that first surface mirror. And first blow it off with a can of air or a brush to get the dust off before you try and go in with a solvent to clean the fingerprints off. Because if you still have dust on, or sand or a little piece of grit on there, rubbing it with any kind of cloth is just going to scratch that surface. So make sure you get all the dust particles off first before you apply any type of solvent to clean the oil off.
And Vic in the comments gives a recommendation for Endust for electronics that could be a good one for you to use to clean your lenses or to clean your iKan. Next question.
From the QR code, Justin Anderson in New York is asking, looking at the current landscape of emerging technology, what are you looking forward to the most, and what do you think will be the most significant change in the industry?
John?
Human beings spend a tremendous amount of time in their cars, and all their attention should be devoted to the road. So self-driving cars, I think, are going to really transform society in general.
Alex?
I'll go the other way and say the continuation of work from home is going to be, people spend a lot of time and people would rather just spend it at home. And I think you're going to see that. I think we surged forward, we pulled back a little bit, but what we're seeing is this kind of, there's like 30% of the job market, 30% of the workers that just don't want to come in. And what they're doing is they're kind of just slowly moving around to companies that let them do that. And that's just creating a lot of drag for the return to work. It's not that it's eliminating it, but it's creating a certain level of drag. And I think that's going to continue to affect the industry. And I think that a lot of us will continue to see technologies like Zoom and other things get better because more and more people are doing it. The other thing to look at is how streaming is affecting campaigning. We thought that streaming would affect campaigning, 8 years ago, 12 years ago. But what's happening now is that a couple of the campaigns are seeing incredible spikes in viewership, like hundreds of thousands of people watching their live streams. And that's because the technology's gotten a lot better and they can actually do that. And so it's not just one campaign, it's a couple different ones. And suddenly the light is turned on like, hey, this is something that we can do a lot more of. We can increase our flow. So I think you're going to see a fall with a lot of live streams in the political nature. And we haven't seen that really happen at a large scale. What happened in 2020 is that a lot of the campaigns, well, the one that won, spent a lot of time doing small, very directed streams. This is something at a different scale, and I think you're probably going to see political live streams with over rallies, quote unquote, rallies and fundraisers that have over 1 million viewers, and that'll probably happen by September.
Jesse?
I think in the last 6 months, we kind of received and got over the sugar rush of general use AI, large language models and generative AI. I think the next thing that we're going to see that's going to be very, very fun to watch is a creative technology that comes from people, and that is how to apply this and where we're going to direct the generative models. I would love to tell you where I think it's headed specifically, but I'm not clever enough. Other people are going to imagine things that 99.999% of the population have never imagined on ways to apply these models.
Go ahead, Bill.
With all the information in the world online and accessible in our pockets, what you know is going to matter less and less. All that's going to matter is how you make other people feel. On cruise, everywhere else, if they want to associate with you and work with you, they can. If they don't, they won't increasingly. I just think that rarefied area where only a few people know how to do this stuff is just going to dissolve away, and it's going to be left with communities of affinity. So learn your social skills. Learn how to work in a crew. Learn how to make people feel like they want to have you around them. If you want to be continuously employed, I think those are going to be the skills that are going to really matter going forward.
Courtney?
Yeah, in Hollywood, it's always been who you know, not what you know. As far as technology goes, I'd say gallium arsenide for computing chips speeds up things. It handles things much faster than silicon and can be used to generate qubits or quantum computing. And the other thing is improvements in battery technology. Battery technology is going to change the transportation for everyone. And so it's going to speed up transportation, make it more efficient, and last longer. Same things with portable computing. Battery technology is going to make changes in battery technology are going to change it.
And Ant.
When Sony announced the global shutter in their latest A9, it gave me hope for it being able to trickle down into what's offered in Nikon and Canon side of things when it comes to the pro or prosumer grade camera body. Now, Red has the global shutter and video side of things, but I'm interested more so on the stills side of things. And Didn't see that just yet with the Canon R1, but again, that was already in development, and it's probably going to be another year or two, I guess. But that's what I'm looking forward to.
Next question.
From Matthew LeCount in Oakland, how did yesterday's special TWiT go?
Alex?
It went great. We had about almost 800 viewers in their Vision Pros, and so we're going to keep on building that out. So stay tuned for more announcements related to that.
Well, that's the end of today's show. Thank you so much to our producers for all of your questions, to our panelists for sharing your insights, your thoughts, and of course, our back-end team, for without which this would not be possible. To see the schedule for the rest of the week, you want to head over to officehours.global, and make sure if you got any questions, head over to askofficehours.global. And we have traveled today on the Talek Traversal 33,000 miles, 53,000 kilometers. That is 261 bananas for scales. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Chronos, by the way, that's the one that I was trying to find it. Chronos, the Chronos 4K 12 does up to, I think, 1,000 frames a second at 4K.
Not a Phantom, but a Chronos. Yes,
it's just less expensive. It's expensive
Phantoms.
still. Like I think like $12,000 or something like that. But it's not as expensive as a. And they have smaller ones that are like less expensive. But
Alex, is there a recording of what people saw through the Vision headset? Because I don't have one. I would love to see how that looked.
Oh, I don't know what it looks just like a 2D image. When you do the recording, it looks like a 2D image, but but you see an environment around it. You won't see the 3.3, it won't really be any way to represent that, but we are going to repost it as a VOD, probably later this week. So stay tuned.
No one was brave enough to wear their Vision Pro on camera. I noticed. Ant, were you wearing one off camera there? You were there.
Heck, I'm just